Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
This is a Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on WABC Radio. If you're in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area where I grew up, you can find us at 770 on the AM dial. If you're out of town, you can listen to the entire show either now or even later in download at WABCradio.com. If you're listening now, go to your cell phone and either call or text your friends, one somebody in your family, and tell them to tune in to 770 AM or to go online at WABC Radio, because you're not going to want to miss this show. Today I have the singular honor of having the greatest mayor in New York City history, Rudy Giuliani, and his son, Andrew Giuliani, who ran a valiant and I think distinguished race for governor of New York, a young man whose greatest public service, without any question, lies ahead. Now, many people know that the name Stone is a name plucked out of thin air by some Irish clerk at Ellis Island, and that my real last family name is Corbo, C-O-R-B-O, and we are from Sicily. Therefore, you could call this segment Three Italian Guys Sitting Around Talking. I want to honor Rudy Giuliani and Andrew Giuliani to the Roger Stone Show. Mayor, thank you so much for doing this.
Roger, I'm sure we're being tape recorded.
Of that, there is no doubt. Probably by people beyond those at WABC.
Right.
Andrew, thanks for joining us on the show.
Well, Roger, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the distinguished introduction. You know, just a few minutes ago on my show here, I was saying between, Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone, I don't know what I'm doing with this threesome right here, but I'll tell you what, we're going to have a whole lot of fun, that's for sure.
We are.
Well, it's a Roger Stone party. If you're invited, you're indicted. So what can I say? So let's dive right into this. Rudy Giuliani, a graduate of Manhattan College and New York University Law School, former assistant U.S. attorney. I was a lowly volunteer in his first campaign for mayor, a race that he lost narrowly to David Dinkins. Dinkins was not a bad mayor. He was just a bad man. He was just a terrible mayor. And, of course, Rudy Giuliani came back for a rematch to win that office at a time when people were saying New York City was over, that the problems of New York in terms of both taxes, housing, and particularly crime were just intractable, that we had to live with less. We had to live in a dangerous, dirty, filthy, dysfunctional place. But Rudy Giuliani challenged that narrative, challenged that thinking. I knew Ed Koch, also not a bad guy, but On the show today, we have the greatest mayor in New York City. I've said it before in introducing him in various crowds. I say it again today. So, Mayor, let's jump right into it. Big city crime is a major issue these days. Just doesn't seem to be getting any better. You have a track record in this area that is the envy of every mayor, every police chief across America. What's the best advice you would give a mayor or a police chief to begin to solve these problems like you did in 1994, 1995 when you became mayor? And while you're at it, elaborate on what the broken window theory of policing is.
Sure. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the broken windows theory and their misunderstanding of it. But really, it's an easier problem than it was, Roger, back in the day that you're talking about, because we do have a game plan that we can look at, not just in New York, but throughout the country where crime went all the way down. And the reality is, and I know this will sound partisan, but the hell with it, to the truth, this is a product of the thinking of the modern so-called progressive Democrat Party, which is not very progressive at all. It's extremely retrogressive. It's a basically indulge the criminal at all costs philosophy. Maybe because they want the vote, maybe because they think they can be more appealing to the minority voter that way. I don't know what their thinking is, but this is a produced crime wave, produced by Democrats. And some of it is exacerbated by 2020, the example of 2020. Criminals watch television like everyone else does. And when they saw that you could walk into a store, you take everything out, and the cops did nothing, they just wrote it down. And it was being, if not encouraged, certainly excused by Biden, Harris, and everybody else. It then entered into what they did in their cities, in their towns. And we went through the Defund the Police movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. All those things have created where we are today. And they have to be deconstructed. I mean, what we need are mayors and police commissioners. It sounds simple, who will enforce the law. And they don't have to do it strictly. They don't have to become monsters. But when you get arrested for stabbing somebody, you should be held, and you should be tried quickly, and you should go to jail for a period of time, depending on your background. You shouldn't be put back out on the street in 3 hours, which is what is happening in New York. There are 7,000 people, roughly, that are walking the streets of New York right now. Could be more, that would be in jail when I was the mayor or when Bloomberg and Kelly were in charge, that are now walking the streets and creating the crime that is frightening the living daylights out of New Yorkers. And that number keeps increasing. They put criminals on the street, and it's worse some places than New York. That philosophy has to be changed, and we have to go back to enforcing the law in a disciplined, sensible way, and recognizing that there are some people, the only way you're going to stop them from committing crimes is by putting them behind bars. You leave them out on the street, and these career criminals will violate hundreds and hundreds of people.
This is, if you're just joining us, this is WABC Radio. This is the Roger Stone Show. In our second hour, Kimberly Guilfoyle joins us. She is, of course, the fiancée of Donald Trump Jr., but more importantly, she is the star of the Kimberly Guilfoyle Show on Rumble, an experienced broadcaster, many, many years at Fox, longtime friend of mine, but the fiercest MAGA warrior of them all. She joins us later. Also joining us, Buffalo Congressman Chris Collins. If you think what they did to General Flynn was an outrage, if you think what they did to me was an outrage, wait till you hear what they did to Congressman Chris Collins, a man who actually never did anything wrong, spent a brief period of time in a federal penitentiary, a federal lockup, only to be pardoned as an act of both justice and mercy by President Donald Trump. Chris Collins joins us in our second hour. Andrew Giuliani, people don't understand how all-consuming a race for statewide office, particularly in a large state like New York can be. You have the added burden of being the son of a famous father. That's an extraordinarily difficult burden. Let me give you an example. Governor Tom Kean of New Jersey, my first solo client as a political consultant, elected in 1981 by 1,209 votes out of 2.5 million cast, was a great two-term governor of New Jersey. His son, Tom Kean Jr., served in the state Senate, now in the House. I liked young Tom, but recently he voted against the motion to censure Adam Schiff. A disappointment. I'm hoping that things will improve. I didn't know you before you ran for governor. I was prepared to think, well, this guy worked in the Trump White House and spent some time as a professional golfer. I got to tell you, your campaign in terms of messaging, in terms of discipline, in terms of energy, in terms of drive, in terms of purpose, really blew me away. And I particularly like the classy way in which you accepted a close defeat, but then you warmly endorsed and campaigned for the Republican who defeated you, which is the way you move forward in this business. Tell people what running for governor of a state like New York is like.
Well, Roger, first off, thank you for the compliments. It, like I said before, it means a whole lot coming from you. You know, I think one of the things that when you think about being the son of a, famous father, somebody who's accomplished so much, as you said, the greatest mayor in the history of New York, one of the greatest prosecutors in the history of our country, the one thing that I am aided by is that Hunter Biden has set the bar so low these days that as long as I have not done cocaine in the White House library, I'm considered to be a success by many. I'm kidding around, obviously. There, let me get back to the question that you have at hand there. When you think about a state like New York and the 62 counties, and you think about how different some of those counties are, like New York County in Manhattan, where we've elected a district attorney like an Alvin Bragg by 80% of the vote. And then other places, when you start going to Western New York and you start going into the Adirondacks and you start going into the Uticas of the world, where you have a lot of blue collar, feels like you're really in Midwestern America in many ways. It feels almost more like what many would think of an Ohio and a Michigan and a Wisconsin. It really is multiple strategies depending on where you are in the state in terms of trying to get your vote out. What's the messaging? Because what people may be dealing with as a challenge in New York City, let's say some of the rogue district attorneys, they're not necessarily dealing with that. Let's say if you go up to Clinton County, which is up north by Plattsburgh, for them, in many places, they're dealing with kind of the shutdowns of so much of our penitentiary system there. And that's really a main job producer in so much of Western and Northern New York. In New York City, we're obviously seeing the deterioration of the quality of life, which my father, Rudy, just covered here recently. You can think about just recently this guy who actually reported somebody on his phone at the convenience store who worked there stealing $500 worth of stuff. What ends up happening? They don't arrest the guy. They actually take the guy who reported it and fired him. And sadly, that's what we're dealing with in so many of these cities. And in terms of, after I realized that that the people had chosen Congressman Zeldin to be the Republican nominee, it was about 2 seconds where I thought, what would be a better future for my daughter and my family? Would it be better if we had conservative principles espoused by my opponent, Lee Zeldin, or would it be better if Kathy Hochul was running our state as she is right now, where we're seeing more and more New Yorkers leave for the likes of Florida and Texas and Tennessee, where we're seeing, sadly, crime and quality of life deteriorate, where we're seeing radical ideas being put into our education system, almost independent now of whether or not it's in public school or in private school. And for me, it wasn't even a choice. So when I look at kind of my mission over the next 40 to 50 years, I realize it's to make sure that I hand off a better state, a better city, a better country for my daughter than was handed to me by my father and by his parents.
Mayor Giuliani, a softball question. Woke bureaucrats in the administration of Mayor Eric Adams want to outlaw pizza ovens that are fueled by either wood or coal. This bureaucratic nightmare would mean that classic pizza places, the emporiums of the greatest pizza on earth, we're talking Luigi's Pizza, we're talking Tantano's, Della Rocco's, Grimaldi's, Lucali, DeFara, John's of Bleecker Street. I mean, these are temples of great pizza. They would be no more. Is this the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard?
You know, Roger, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I would never think this, but I think it's almost on purpose to try to wipe out our culture. If I look at what they've been doing for the last 10, 12 years, even before we noticed it, the organized, progressive, left-wing, Marxist-influenced Democrats, they're doing everything they can to wipe out our culture, whether it's trying to take down Theodore Roosevelt's statue or Jefferson's statue, or in our case, I mean, pizza is part of what defines New York. It's one of the reasons people come to New York for the best pizza in the world, and these people are anti-American. All you have to do is read Soros, and you can see he is vehemently anti-American nationalism because he wants us to meld into one world. Beyond it, it's also part of the climate culture insanity, the cult of climate change. The small amount of carbon emitted by all of these ovens over a 1 year period is just one trip on John Kerry's airplane. And it's ridiculous. It makes no sense scientifically. I think it's done, for political purposes because, we're the deplorable enemy and they can go after Italian Americans. I mean, after all, they go after people who like the Latin Mass. What the heck's that all about?
No, you're absolutely right.
Latin Mass, you're a terrorist?
I think they want to outlaw anything in which we find enjoyment, in all honesty. I think that's a part of it. The idea that you would take down the statue of Theodore Roosevelt in front of the Museum of Natural History. Theodore Roosevelt, who, by the way, was widely criticized for inviting Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House. Theodore Roosevelt, who believed in the equality of all men.
His family fought in the Civil War to free the slaves. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But it is the woke culture. Andrew, you have been all over the state. I think that the Republican nominee, Mr. Zeldin, ran a valiant effort. But in all honesty, do you think it is possible for New York Republicans to elect a statewide candidate again? I mean, between the level of cheating, the level of illegals, and the changing demographics of New York State, is it possible to win a statewide race?
Well, let me answer it with the numbers, first of all. So, on the campaign trail, when I was and my team were looking at numbers in terms of what we would need to pull in New York City, and this wasn't just me. I remember hearing campaign speeches by Congressman Zeldin and Rob Astorino and Harry Wilson as well, talking about what the Republican needed to do in New York City specifically. The target was 30 to 35%. My target was 35% plus in New York City because I knew that you had more people that had moved out of New York City, more Republicans, and you'd seen that in terms of upstate, we had lost a lot of the northern part of New York, a lot of central New York. We had lost a lot of red areas in New York. Congressman Zeldin, in order to have won, if everything else was the same in the other 57 counties of New York, and if we look at the 5 counties of New York City, he would have needed to have pulled 39% of New York City. He cracked 30%, would have needed 39%. So look, if you go back and look and think that just a few years ago, we've had, 20 years of consecutive, we'll say, non-democratic mayors, and obviously 4 consecutive terms of Republican mayors in New York. Whatever you think about Mike Bloomberg now, he ran as a Republican, won as a Republican for 2 of those terms, and then obviously in his 3rd term ran and won as an independent. So yes, it is possible, but you kind of need to hit the inside straight, if you will. I think looking at it from a political standpoint, you'll have more Democrats come out and vote if there's a Republican in the White House against the Republican candidate, let's say, in a midterm election, and vice versa. You'll have Democrats that are not as enthused to come on out and vote if you have a Democrat in the White House. So at least looking forward to 2026, if you have a Republican in the White House, like I know we're all pulling for President Trump, which, by the way, Roger, you did a fantastic job interviewing him a few weeks ago. I know you guys have been friends for 40 years plus, and you did a spectacular job. I listened to your interview in preparing for my interview, and kudos to you in doing that. But if you have President Trump in the White House, it becomes very difficult for a Republican to win statewide in New York. And that's not just because of President Trump. That's any Republican there. If a Democrat is in the White House, then probably a Republican has a better chance, just because you'll have Democrats that are not enthused to come on out. They're not having the national media that's going to continue to beat everybody over the head about how bad the Republican is for your state. And on top of the fact that you'll have Kathy Hochul continuing to push these policies that, as you said before, woke policies that are hurting our quality of life, not just in New York, but in the Binghamtons, the Rochesters, the Buffaloes. The thing that was amazing to me in really studying and learning the state was to see that in 2021, at least, both Binghamton and Rochester had the most murders in recorded history. So this isn't just a problem that existed in New York City. This existed all around the state in urban areas. So is it possible? Yes, but you need the right things to align in order to hit that, I think.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Plan on flying? In order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a real ID. Learn how to get your real ID today at tsa.gov/real ID or visit your local DMV.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
If you're just tuning in, folks, I have the Giuliani duo with me, former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, the greatest mayor in New York City history, and his son, Andrew Giuliani, whose show precedes mine here, right here at WABC Radio. And I'm honored to have both these gentlemen with us. You can tune in at 770 on the AM dial. You can also hear us at WABCRadio.com. You can either listen live there, or you can download and listen to the show later. I recommend you go get the WABC Radio app, because that way you can listen to the great Sid Rosenberg, my good friend Frank Morano, if you're a night owl, Frank Morano's After Midnight show, always a winner. Larry Kudlow, the quarterback of President Donald Trump's successful effort to turbocharge the economy during his presidency. Of course, the Cats Roundtable, where John Catsimatidis every day at 5 breaks down the breaking news for you, particularly a table setter on Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. All of it available on the WABC radio app. I really urge you to download that to your phone. Mayor Giuliani, you were mayor on September 11th, 2001, when al-Qaeda terrorists killed nearly 3,000 people by flying hijacked planes into the World Trade Center's 2 towers. You immediately took charge of the rescue and recovery efforts, acting extremely decisively and with extraordinary courage and poise under pressure to calm the city of New York. In appreciation of those leadership efforts, many called you America's mayor. Time magazine named you as Person of the Year. Queen Elizabeth II awarded you an honorary knighthood, so from now on I have to call you Sir Rudy Giuliani.
No, you don't.
On March 8, 2002, the greatest mayor in New York City history received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from perhaps the greatest, or maybe the second greatest president in American history, Ronald Reagan. Mayor Giuliani, when you were first told that these terrorists had attacked the World Trade Center, what's the first thing that came in your mind?
Well, when I first realized it was terrorists, because at first I didn't know whether it was my first notification was that a twin-engine plane had hit the North Tower. But when I walked out of the Peninsula Hotel where I was having breakfast, and I saw the tremendous fire, my counsel, Dennison Young, and I said, no, this has to be much worse. And then I was about a mile away when the second plane hit, and my police commissioner, Bernie Kerik, called, and we knew immediately that it was al-Qaeda. You know, we had threats from bin Laden to the 2000 New Year's Eve celebration. We had consistent threats because some of his people were on trial just 4 blocks away from City Hall in the Southern District of New York. So we were expecting some kind of a terrorist act, but certainly not airplanes being used as missiles attacking our building. But at least we had the advantage of having an idea of who our enemy was. And I had a police commissioner who had spent a lot of time both in the military and doing policing in the Middle East, who understood Islamic terrorism well. So, I just said to myself, this is the worst thing I've ever faced. It's beyond anything I've ever done before. And I'm just going to have to put aside all emotion and pray to God that I make the right decision and use all the experience that I have and contain my emotions. And Bernie and I kind of hugged, agreed on that, and then we just made decisions and prayed to God they were right.
You refer, of course, to former Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, perhaps the greatest police commissioner in New York City history. God, I wish we had him back now.
Wow. Do I wish we had him back? Of course, every day.
The current mayor doesn't seem to be able to find a police commissioner whose brother is not a convicted felon.
I would take in a minute the great police commissioner Ray Kelly, who Bloomberg had, great police commissioner, or Howard Safer or Bratton, the two that I had. I mean, these were all 4. You'd have to have like an interesting argument like you do in baseball, who's greater, who's better. But that's what you need, not people who let people out of jail and the police are dispirited and they don't feel like they're supported, and it's a terrible thing. I mean, morale has a lot more to do with policing than people realize, because they are, a somewhat military organization. And when they're led by these people like a Biden or a Adams and even though Adams was a police officer, he really wasn't. And the cops know that. I mean, he was sort of a leader of 100 black men in law enforcement who would constantly raise issues, some valid and a lot invalid, to get himself publicity. But I can't remember an arrest that he ever made. So it's not like he played himself as a real cop. But real cops know he's not a real cop. Right?
Well, unfortunately...
And he makes absurd decisions. He makes silly decisions.
Unfortunately, Eric Adams writes in his biography that while he was a New York police captain, he provided personal private security for Mike Tyson and for the Reverend Louis Farrakhan, both of them convicted felons, a clear violation of a rarely employed regulation of the NYPD, which an officer is not allowed to consort with a person who in the past has or in the future might be involved in committing a crime. That regulation has been used to terminate the employment of my good friend, Officer Salvatore Greco, proud son of Staten Island, a cop with a 14-year unblemished record of service to the people of New York City, sometimes assigned to the graveyard shift in some of the most dangerous precincts of New York, who literally was terminated, loses his pension, doesn't get a good conduct letter, so he can't get a job as a police officer in any other jurisdiction. And now Mayor Adams has moved to seal his disciplinary records, because what they would show is when he was investigated for violating the same regulation, they docked his vacation time by 5 days. Now add insult to injury. Cardi B, a convicted criminal, a rapper who records songs about killing cops, she's invited to address the New York City Police Academy, an obvious violation of the same regulation. When asked about this, Mayor Adams says, oh, well, that was court-ordered community service. Really, Mayor? Show us the court order, Mayor. We'd like to see that court order. It doesn't exist. It's just another egregious example of the two-tier justice system in which an officer who, on his days off, had the right to support Donald Trump and a right to be a friend to me and my wife when we were going through tough times, he gets fired. But Eric Adams, he pays no penalty. And Cardi B, she's a celebrity, so there's different rules for her. Yeah, the whole thing is outrageous. Folks can go to helpthisnYcop.com if they want to read more about this. HelpthisNYcop.com. It is a just cause. Officer Salvatore Greco's in federal court now with a lawsuit, a civil suit, and I predict that he will prevail because what's being done to him is outrageously unfair.
By the way, Roger, too, I don't want to cut you off, but I have to tell you. Go ahead, Dad. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I heard the interview that Sal did, I think a couple of days ago with Frank Morano earlier this week, and it was great. I'd recommend anybody go to WABCRadio.com to listen to that, but I remember hearing it overnight. I think I caught it the next morning, as a matter of fact, but I know you mentioned Frank Morano before. It's a very good interview that they did, and they get into a lot of that.
Well, in fact, Sal Greco was on Tucker Carlson. I think his next to last show, or maybe his third to last show, was a terrific interview. This guy's life has been turned upside down. He's lost everything, including his pension. He's moved to Florida, but he can't get a job as a police officer, which is really what he loves, because he doesn't have a good conduct letter over his termination in New York. It's entirely unfair, but we know how all of that works. Mayor Giuliani, the 2020 election, obviously highly controversial. You were a key figure in the Trump campaign's effort to challenge the results. Looking back, are you now able to share with our audience what, in hindsight, you see both as perhaps the biggest mistakes that were made in the challenge, but also the greatest successes from both a legal and political point of view?
Yeah, I think the mistake that was made is to go to the courts in the first place. I don't think we realized that there was going to be basically a shutdown in no hearings, not hearing any testimony. I've never witnessed that before. I mean, you go to court with a temporary restraining order, they listen to your witnesses. And even more than winning a particular case, my interest was getting the citizens on the record, because whether we were going to win now or in the future, you had to make a record of this. And these were not complaints of Donald Trump or me or you, or these were complaints of Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith, and who went to the polling place and were told they had already voted. I mean, 17,000 people went to the polling place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and were told they had already voted. Republicans were shut out of observing over 600,000 ballots that were counted in Pennsylvania in front of them, but they were 2 football fields away. And even when Pam Bondi got an order to see them, the sheriff, a Democratic hack, said, I'm not enforcing it. So there was a clear conspiracy never to let us see a single ballot. We never got to see a single ballot. What we should have done immediately is gone to the legislatures and made our case there. And we did, but we were about 8 weeks late because we tried the courts. And luckily, the thing we were able to do with the legislatures was to document our case. So there are about 400 or 500 witnesses in one way or another that have either testified or submitted affidavits from which you can historically build a case of theft of the election. And then since then, there have been reports that have furthered that, 2,000 Mules, for example, being one of them. Their technology was not available to us at the time and would have taken 6 months to do. But there's been, in all the time that movie has been out, there hasn't been a single substantive criticism of one example they gave of someone stuffing a ballot box. It's just a general, it's been debunked. It's not true. The same thing that the Bidens have been saying for 5 years on all the evidence that's coming out against them. They've never been able to rebut a single one of those thousands and thousands of basically scientifically determined locations of these people who are stuffing the ballot box. So there's a plethora of evidence from the point of view of history that will show that it will definitely show that this election was the most interfered with and fraudulent in American history. And I think it'll show that Trump actually won. But actually, more importantly, it'll show a tremendous effort to cheat him. Now, you don't even need that. You can go back to covering up the hard drive as election fraud. What the heck was that all about? I mean, there was clear evidence of maybe 40 or 50 crimes by Joe Biden and his son that the FBI had already validated, and they allow this debate to go on as to whether it's valid or not. From a personal point of view, they allowed Biden to go on national television in a debate and accuse Donald Trump and me, personally using my name, of being a Russian agent. And that was Russian disinformation. They had determined 8 months earlier that it wasn't. And they don't even correct that. Barr doesn't correct it. So when I see Barr pontificating, you can imagine the reaction that I have when he sat on that information. I mean, that was election determinative. The American people knew half of what's in the hard drive before the election. I mean, even now when you go back and poll them, 10, 20% say they would have changed their vote.
Mayor Giuliani, of course, refers to Hunter Biden's laptop hard drive. By the way, folks, if you haven't seen that and you want to see it, you can go to MarcoPoloUSA.org, MarcoPoloUSA.org. That is a nonprofit organization that has very carefully and very accurately posted online and put together in print form all of Hunter Biden's laptop information. It is very carefully footnoted and annotated. There's no analysis here. This is straight fact. They did add footnotes to make it more understandable. If you have kids in the home, don't worry about the images. They have been blurred since some of them are extraordinarily pornographic and shocking. But I urge you to go to MarcoPoloUSA.org. Very expensive lawyers for Hunter Biden are now suing the Marco Polo organization in an attempt to silence them. So you can not only see the laptop there, you can actually order a printout of it, which is really, really compelling. But I also urge you to make a contribution. This is an 8-man band of freedom fighters, of truth tellers. Hunter Biden is spending literally millions of dollars on mean, nasty attorneys to threaten those who have the audacity to expose Hunter Biden's record. Mayor, a follow-up question. Anthony Blinken, our current Secretary of State, there's a lot of evidence that he's the guy who went around and lined up the 51 current and former intelligence agency officials to co-sign a letter falsely claiming that Hunter Biden's laptop had, quote, all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Yet I see no accountability. I see no effort to hold our current failed Secretary of State responsible. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, I'm obviously personally injured by that because I was the primary person they accused of being a Russian agent. I was the one who got the hard drive, along with Bob Costello, my lawyer. Everybody else wouldn't take it. If Bob and I hadn't gotten it, it wouldn't have come out. And there was nothing about it that was Russian. In fact, I mean, you could tell just from the letter that it was phony. When someone says it has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, Roger, Andrew, and they don't give you a hallmark, like a single example, as a lawyer of 50 years, I can tell you they're lying. Because the first thing you want to do is put together your 2 or 3 best examples that buries them. So they say it has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Like what? It's written in Russian? It has a Moscow stamp on it? What were the plus? They knew it was valid. The FBI had validated it 8 months earlier. They had to all know it. Most of them had access to classified information. So, I mean, these people are traitors.
It could be the second single greatest dirty trick in American history, the first one being the Russian collusion hoax. We now know, based on the long-delayed, slow-roll support of Special Counsel John Durham, that neither the DOJ, the CIA, or the FBI had any probable cause whatsoever to justify the opening of the Crossfire Hurricane counterintelligence investigation. They had no legal predicate for the appointment of Robert Mueller. They had no justification or legal rationale for the application for multiple FISA warrants so that they could spy on Donald Trump's campaign. This makes Watergate look like small potatoes. This is an abuse of power in which the full legal authority of the United States government and the extraordinary capability of our intelligence agencies were weaponized illegally and illicitly to launch an effort to remove a duly elected president. In fact, I would argue that it's treasonous. Yet, thanks to the slow motion operations of John Durham, the statute of limitations has passed and nobody will be prosecuted. Durham, to me, is an enigma. This guy prosecutes the people at the very lowest level of the Clinton crime family. It would be like charging the driver of the getaway car in a bank robbery for double parking, letting the bank robbers testify against him, thus incriminating themselves, but letting them keep the loot. It's really quite extraordinary. We have to move it along here. I got one more question for you, Andrew. You served as special assistant to President Trump. You spent a lot of time with him, watching him work through the administration and afterwards. You've played golf with him. You have a lot of experience on the golf course yourself. What is Donald Trump really like as a golfer? I think people underestimate his athleticism. What is he like as a golfer?
Well, I got to tell you, I played with him just a couple days after our interview last weekend, and he made 6 birdies in one round. It was actually the best round I've ever seen him play. So, Roger, I think you and I should both take credit for that because you interview him, I interview him a few short weeks later, and then all of a sudden his game is the best that I've ever seen. I actually told him, Roger, that I really hope his game gets a whole lot worse again in 2 years when he gets into president and he's too busy to work on his putting and his short game. But the truth is, I think, in all seriousness, in seeing him work every day for 4 years, I'll tell you one story that I think really encapsulates all of it. This is about a week after the country was shut down because of the pandemic. And we were at that point, there were a couple of all-nighters at the White House. And I think by that point, we were kind of doing 16 to 18-hour days. And I remember one night going home after midnight, getting home, and finally getting to bed around 1 o'clock. And I got a call on the bat phone, on the government phone there from the president at 2:27 in the morning. And it was only about a 4-minute call or so. And I wrote down the note went back to bed, and I had set my alarm for 5:45. He calls me again at 5:23 in the morning. Again, another 2-minute call. He sounded just as awake as he had ever been. And I wrote down the exact same note, and I tried to go back to sleep for the next 15 minutes before my alarm was going to ring. And I just thought, does this guy ever sleep? It's amazing. And that's kind of the same way that I feel about my father. Roger, I know you have an incredible work ethic yourself. But I think that one of the things about President Trump was he understood just how important the role of president was, especially the people who had elected him, coming in as a populist, as somebody who was really going into, as he had said so many times on the campaign trail, drain the swamp of Washington, D.C. And I think maybe he didn't even realize, and I think all of us didn't even realize just how much he was up against, not just from the Democrats, but from the Republicans in his own party. I think going forward, and if he is in fact elected the president starting on January 20th, 2025, I think he's going to look not just at the opposite party, but people in his own party in Washington, D.C. And I think we might see the full draining of the swamp that we had not only hoped for, but had begun in the first term.
Yeah, I think we have an awakened Donald Trump who is both older but also wiser. And therefore, It's amazing how much he accomplished in his first term. Boom economy, rebuilding our military strength, scores of conservatives on the federal courts, reinstilling fear in our enemies around the world. Wait till you see what he does in a second term. You know, they asked Ronald Reagan at the end of his second term, they said, well, you didn't come from the world of government or politics. You didn't come from the military. Do you think your background as an actor was detrimental to your performance as president? He said, fellas, I don't see how a guy who wasn't an actor could ever do this job. I think President Trump understood that. We have to move this along. I want to thank Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
Thank you, Roger. Always a pleasure.
The greatest mayor in New York City history.
Thank you, Roger.
Andrew Giuliani, the future greatest governor of the state of New York, for joining us here on The Roger Stone Show.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
This is The Roger Stone Show here on WABC Radio. If you're in the greater New York area, the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, where I grew up, you can tune in at 770 on the AM dial. If you're out of town, you can listen to the entire show at WABCradio.com. You can also go back and listen to it later if you don't have time to listen now. But go to your cell phone right now, send a text or call a friend and tell them to tune in to WABC, where we are making AM radio great again. Joining us now, very excited about this, my longtime friend, Kimberly Guilfoyle. You remember and recognize her from Fox News, where she was once one of the standout stars. She now is the star of the Kimberly Guilfoyle Show on Rumble. And very recently, she had me very graciously on her show. And that show, last time I looked, had 1.9 million downloads. That's virtually 2 million downloads. Why? Well, because Kimberly Guilfoyle and I share one quality. We tell it like it is. We don't care if you don't like it. We don't care if you don't like us. We do care whether you like the truth, and we are always going to lay the truth on our audience. Kimberly Guilfoyle, thank you so much for joining the Roger Stone Show.
Well, what a pleasure to be on your program. And you tell it like it is. I tell it like it is. And you're right. I was like, trying not to laugh out loud. Like, we don't care if you like it. I mean, it's really the truth, because we're on a mission. We have a purpose and a passion to get the facts and the truth out there and connect with the great American patriots in this country. And, damn if I'm going to let the, mainstream media and the fake news shapeshift everything and tell the people a false narrative that they try to shove down their throats every day. I really do believe, Roger, this country is, worth fighting for. And, nobody sacrificed more than Trump, the Trump family, yourself, General Flynn, Manafort, the people they have just gone after, anybody with the intelligence and the passion to support and the integrity to support the movement and support the president and fight for the country. And, it's so apparent with everything that we've been seeing going on with Biden, and just a complete and utter disgrace, an embarrassment, a complete buffoon in the White House with his son, who is just a straight up criminal. This family behaves worse than any kind of, white trash people even try to say. It's just a sad, sad state of affairs. They didn't win the election. They're occupying the White House and just turning this country into a disgrace with the open borders, the fentanyl, the sex trafficking, the lack of infrastructure, manufacturing, just a complete limp and weakened, emaciated economy. And we had so much prosperity under President Trump. And that's why people are showing up in record numbers for these rallies, wanting to be there for him. Like you said, the rally that he had that was, they estimate at a lowball number, 50,000. You have sources and reports saying there were 80,000 people that showed up. That's a hunger and a thirst for American greatness and to restore the America First principles and platform and ideology in this country. I believe more than ever that we can do it again.
I can't think of any other figure in public life, not just politics, but in public life, meaning sports, entertainment, politics. I can't think of any other public figure that could draw a crowd of 50,000 Americans any place in the United States. Look, I worked for Ronald Reagan. He was one of the greatest presidents of my lifetime. But he never had the kind of support and the intensity of support that Donald Trump has. And don't get me wrong, Ronald Reagan was very popular. He was a very successful president. He had great intensity. I love Ronald Reagan. But even Donald Trump surpasses him in terms of his approval rating among Republicans and in terms of the intensity. In other words, if you're a Trump voter, even if you're not a Republican, and by the way, that's the secret sauce, Donald Trump can attract a group of people out there who did not vote for John McCain, who did not vote for Mitt Romney, who never would vote for either one of them, who will vote for Donald Trump, would not vote for Governor Ron DeSantis, for example, were he to be the Republican nominee, which he's not going to be. I don't know what to call these people. They're not Republicans. They've kind of given up on politics, but they came back and they voted simply because of Donald Trump. That's the missing element here that the other Republicans who would be the nominee completely miss. That only Trump can attract these working class, non-establishment voters who've been completely turned off to public life, to government, to all of our institutions until Donald Trump came along and restored their faith that we could make America great again. And, of course, in his first 4 years,
right.
He did that.
It's really true, and it's unlike anything we've seen. And you're a great, historian of politics and what's happened in American political history and, working with so many different presidents and so many different, campaigns, whether nationwide or state specific. But, we saw people just really proud to be Americans, and it was really incredible. And I studied Ronald Reagan a lot. When I was in college and wrote papers about it, he was a great orator and, was taught in all the great rhetoric and communications and political science classes. But you're right. There is something very different and unique, very special, lightning in a bottle about Donald Trump and the enthusiasm. I mean, I've been there when it is pouring rain, thunder, lightning, and people are standing outside in it. It's, it's got an Elvis-like quality to it, where we see this, where it transcends just, politics as we know it, and crosses over, to pop culture and, entertainment, all of the above. But I think more than ever, people are really, really tired of what they see going on in this country. It's wokeness run amok. It's out of control. It's like the U.S. is like a bus careening without a driver going over a slippery slope. And no one wants that. I mean, we want stability. We want someone who actually can function cognitively or otherwise, in the White House. And we don't have that right now. And, Roger, when you were on my show a couple of days ago, you were talking about how you really see this, as just an interesting moment in time, but that, Donald Trump is the one that can really, bring this across the finish line, because I think it's almost just like people see it sometimes as insurmountable odds, because the Democrats and the liberals will do whatever it takes, to win. And to that end, you made, a prediction that you've been stating, and I think you're going to be right about it, that they are going to replace Joe Biden because they know they cannot go up against President Trump with him as the nominee. And you said the truth. It's important to hear it. It kind of scares me a little bit because I think it's so accurate, and I'm actually worried about it, which is Michelle Obama. And like you said, they'll never have, white men up against, as the candidate, the nominee. As VP, yes. And the more I thought about it after you had stated it, and I've heard you say it before, about this whole Michelle Obama potential Gavin Newsom matchup, which is very interesting to me because I think they don't want to lose the White House, and they know they can't win it again with Joe Biden.
People don't know this about you, Kimberly, but you were a prosecuting attorney. You're a lawyer. You were a prosecuting attorney in both San Francisco and Los Angeles. You were very famous, by the way, for giving your summations without a single note. I also don't think you ever actually lost a case. So you were not just a great prosecutor. You were a very successful prosecutor. You're an accomplished lawyer. What is your opinion of the 37-count indictment they brought against Donald Trump in the Southern District of Florida?
I think it's just really shameful. It's really just such a politicized, weaponized indictment. There's no factual basis, no evidence to support it. It's repetitive, charges that they try and actually just show you and shock the conscience with the number, right, by saying 37, but it's not that. And it really bothers me as an officer of the court and having just really fought my life for equal justice and to apply the law without arbitrariness or capriciousness and just actually apply the law to the facts. I took my oath when I took it as a prosecutor very seriously. And I just think that we have people like Alvin Bragg and, now what we see with Jack Smith, and they are just a total disgrace. I mean, it's sacrilegious what they've done to just completely try to persecute Donald Trump. He did not do anything wrong. He is allowed to, under the Presidential Records Act as well, to keep documents, but yet they keep trying to pursue anything they can because he is the primary political opponent and rival of the current sitting president, and they don't want to face him in the ballot box, so they're trying to do anything they can to depress, voters and suppress it so they don't vote for him, to try to keep him out of the running. And, and I honestly think the Uniparty and the globalists are all behind these people running against Trump as, potential, candidates in the primary. I think they're all working together to muddy the waters here.
Well, a couple of them, to their credit, may be running for vice president. By the way, historically, that has been one way to get on the ticket, to run a credible campaign for president.
Well, who do you even like in that mix, Roger?
Well, who hasn't attacked Donald Trump? That's how I would answer your question. Tim Scott hasn't attacked Donald Trump. I kind of like him. Chris Christie, this guy's running for revenge. He needs to run, not for president. He just needs to run. Look at the guy. It's embarrassing. Beyond that, I think the rest of them they're in the race for exercise. Maybe Vivek Ramaswamy is very smart. He shows up in Miami the morning Donald Trump's arraigned, right, and he defends Donald Trump. That's not dumb, folks. That's smart. That means that he's got his fingers on the pulse of the grassroots of the Republican Party. But he was the only presidential candidate to step up that day and defend the president. He has my respect for that.
He has my respect for that, too, and he has the president's respect for that. We talked about it shortly thereafter. And Vivek Ramaswamy has also got his pulse on the youth, the base, the millennials, etc. He's the only one that is of that kind of genre, that age, that speaks and articulates the America First movement very well and connects with them, bringing in new voters. So I'm intrigued by that. And I think he's smart, unlike some of these other dodo birds that are running that don't get it. Trump is not going to pick Nikki Haley. Trump is not going to pick Chris Christie. Trump is not going to pick Ron DeSantis. There's just zero chance of any of that. I agree with you about Tim Scott. He's smart enough to not be attacking. As you know, our great friend, the president, as you know, I know him a very long time as well, almost 20 years now. He's all about loyalty as well. And he is not going to forget that he helped make, Nikki Haley and all of these people, quite frankly, and helping them across the board. But Nikki and Ron DeSantis in particular, I think, it's not been smart the way things have been handled by them, and it's not going to bode well for them.
If you don't live in Florida, if you weren't here in 2018, and although you live here now, you weren't here then, many people really don't know the history, and I think it's important to be laid out. Every single one of the 67 county chairmen in the state of Florida endorsed the state agriculture commissioner, Adam Putnam, for governor. Every single Republican in both the state house and the state senate, including the Senate president and the speaker of the house, endorsed Putnam for governor over Ron DeSantis. Every single Republican member of the Florida congressional delegation, with the exception of Matt Gaetz, endorsed Adam Putnam for governor. Ron DeSantis was an unknown and undistinguished congressman running at about 7% in the polls. The last poll I saw had Putnam up over him 49-7. That's just short of 50. That would have been a wipeout. It is only because of Matt Gaetz and Ron DeSantis, who went on bended knee and literally cried and begged for a tweeted endorsement, and Donald Trump decided to take a flyer. And this guy seemed all right to him, and he appreciated Ron's defense of him on Fox and on conservative talk radio in the Russian collusion hoax. He didn't know, by the way, that Ron DeSantis refused to endorse Donald Trump in 2016, even after he was the nominee of the Republican Party. Nobody evidently told the president that. I wasn't around, so I didn't tell him. But it is only through that tweeted endorsement that Ron DeSantis' candidacy was turbocharged, and he skyrocketed to the Republican gubernatorial nomination. Then he found himself locked into a very tight race with the very clever, very telegenic, and very knowledgeable African-American mayor of Tallahassee. After Ron was essentially beaten in two televised debates, you could argue they were a draw, but he didn't win either one, Donald Trump, out of the goodness of his heart, because he believes in our movement, changed his schedule to come to Florida 3 times in the last 2 weeks of the 2018 campaign to literally drag Ron DeSantis, who was not a very good candidate, over the finish line. Therefore, I see his candidacy as an absolute act of treachery, as nothing worse than a stab in the back. No loyalty to the man who made you. I just don't understand this. He's 42 years old. He is not telegenic, to say the least. He's got some very weird habits, like eating with his hands. He wears lifts in his shoes because he's not very tall. And in all honesty, they say his wife is his greatest asset, but she seems to me to be a JCPenney knockoff, a wannabe of Melania Trump, when she has none of the elegance or poise or culture or kindness that I think exemplify one of our greatest first ladies, Melania Trump, who I've known since 1988. So for those who say, oh, well, what about 2028? I think he's ruined his chances for 2028. That might have been his year. If I were him right now, what I would do is drop out of this race, return to Florida. We have an insurance crisis. We have a mosquito crisis. We have a housing crisis. We have a water quality crisis. We have a crime crisis, all going on in the Sunshine State. And where's our governor? Oh, he's in Iowa, drawing crowds of a couple hundred people, while Donald Trump is getting 50,000, I think it was closer to 80, in a tiny town of Pickens. This candidacy, I'm sorry, it's over. He needs to return to Florida and beg for Donald Trump's forgiveness. One thing I say about Donald Trump, He often reconciles with people who anger him. He's often turns the other cheek when people have crossed him, but when they come back in all sincerity and want to get back on board, maybe, I'm not speaking for the president, but maybe he would forgive Ron and his wife for their treachery. What do you think?
I would like to think so, but I have my doubts about it. But let's see. The interesting thing about President Trump, like you say, is, he is not above, changing his mind. He doesn't hold a position or keep a mindset just for the hell of it. He'll have reasons for changing his mind and listening and paying attention to it, which I do like about him. I think it's a very good leadership quality. I've seen him do it. And he's also not afraid to do that. He's not afraid to change his mind, stand by his decisions, and push forward. And I think he does it in a brilliant fashion that people know and see to be, authentic. He's his own man. And at the end of the day, he's going to do what he believes in. And he makes decisions, in that regard as well. So I'm looking forward to kind of seeing this whole thing, play out. I want him to pick somebody who's fantastic, for VP. There's a few people that I really like. We've discussed a couple of them. Anyone else you like, Roger?
Well, first of all, I think you have to look at this systematically. You can't determine who you want to be your vice presidential running mate until you see how the contest for the nomination goes. It is not impossible. Look, Ronald Reagan lost the Iowa caucuses, went on to be nominated and elected president. Donald Trump lost the Iowa caucuses in 2016, went on to romp in New Hampshire and then run the table on all the primaries and caucuses after that. So until this process plays out, you don't know, politically at least, what you need. Obviously, you need somebody who from day one has the qualifications and the stature and the judgment to, God forbid, step into the presidency in the case of emergency. So that is a given. But from a political point of view, what we don't know is, do you need a woman? Do you need an evangelical Christian? Do you need a Midwesterner? What do you need to round out the ticket for maximum political appeal? It's just too early to say. Some people say, well, what about Kari Lake? I love Kari Lake. I've never seen, and I said this on your show, I haven't seen this much political talent, an effective a communicator since Ronald Reagan himself. She's a rock star. She's an amazing advocate. She was cheated out of the governorship of Arizona. We have more than enough ironclad evidence to prove that. But instead of just folding her tent, disappearing into the night, she's right there in the thick of the battle to take America back again. So she's potentially a great vice president. I have been one who gave voice to this idea of the potential of a bipartisan unity ticket, a ticket that would be comprised, don't yell at me, of Donald Trump for president and Robert F. Kennedy, a Democrat, for vice president.
I'm not going to yell at you. I like that idea.
Now, there are a lot of legal and political impediments to that actually happening, starting with the fact that both Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy would have to be willing, and as of today, I think neither one of them are, nor do either one of them anticipate this happening. But this decision isn't being made now. It's being made next August. And next August, America could be a very different place. I only know Robert Kennedy extremely casually. I'm not an advisor of his. I did not urge him to run. You see this crap all over Twitter. It's just false.
Yeah, I know.
But I do think that he's raising important issues. I do think he's extraordinarily courageous, particularly in talking about the murder of his uncle, President John F. Kennedy, and his father, Senator and former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. He's been very courageous in his fight for health freedom and as a critic of the health bureaucracy embedded within our federal government, which has been completely co-opted by big pharma. He's been, like Donald Trump, he's demanded that our southern border be closed. Like Donald Trump, he has great skepticism about the war in Ukraine and are continuing to receive billions and billions of dollars from the United States without any accountability. So I would like to think that even if Robert F. Kennedy, if he's unsuccessful in his efforts to topple Joe Biden or whoever the Democratic machine decides to put forward. I happen to believe it'll be Michelle Obama. And I think he sadly will be, not because he's not running a great campaign, because although he is being heavily censored, he is running a very provocative and interesting and innovative campaign. And from what I can tell, it's mostly him. He's an extraordinarily compelling debater and speaker. But if at the end of the day the Democratic Party kneecaps him, then perhaps Donald Trump pledges to make him Attorney General, or pledges to appoint him to the cabinet in the role of HHS Secretary. I noticed when he was on with Laura Ingraham on Fox, a very compelling interview, by the way, he was asked, will you endorse Joe Biden if he defeats you? He said, well, I'll have to think about that. In politics, that means no, by the way. And then she asked him if a Republican or if President Donald Trump asked you to serve in his cabinet. He said, well, I'd have to give it very serious consideration, because when you're asked to serve your country, the answer has to be yes. To me, that means he would be willing. By the way, his uncle, John F. Kennedy, had a Republican, C. Douglas Dillon, as his Secretary of the Treasury. Richard Nixon had John Connally, a Democrat, as the Secretary of the Treasury. We have a long tradition of bipartisan cabinets. We have only 2 minutes to go here. Final question, Kim. This is one that's easy for you. Donald Trump has taken in $35 million since the time that he was charged in the Fugazi Smith indictment. This is a record. For the average person out there who wants to give to Donald Trump, where do they go online? Where do they go to give the president a campaign contribution?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways, because what you're talking about, too, I think really reflects the grassroots movement, which is all of the small dollar donors that love to give to President Trump. And then there is also, so with the campaign, and then there's also the MAGA Inc., which is the super PAC, which is putting out all those incredible commercials and ads. I don't know if you've seen them. They've been really incredible. But you can go to this website, DonaldJTrump.com, and you can contribute. You'll see that there, and it says Trump, Make America Great Again 2024. To join the movement, you can enter your email, put your zip code. You can get all the updates. It also gives you an opportunity to be able to volunteer to work for the president. We're setting up, throughout the entire country, and obviously in all of the important, caucus states, et cetera, to be able to go there if you want to help out in Iowa or New Hampshire, all of the above. There's opportunities for people to be involved. And you and I talked about that on the show, and Carrie Lake did, which is really just trying to be participatory. And whether you do it by making even a $5 contribution, our average contributions like $33 or $35. And that means a lot. The president loves it. He talks about it a lot. So I think it's good, because you've got skin in the game, and it'll also help you to show up to make sure that you vote. And the whole point is, they say the MAGA movement, what's it about? Well, it's about the American way of life and America first freedoms and fighting for this country. Everything that President Trump stood for and fought for, and did an incredible job. And he's ready to go on day one. We don't need someone who's JV or with training wheels. We need someone ready to go on day one with executive orders and making sweeping changes to root out all the corruption and stop this weaponization and politicization of government agencies and bureaucracy.
All right. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it there. The beautiful, articulate, fierce Kimberly Guilfoyle, thank you so much for joining us on The Roger Stone Show.
All right. God bless. Thank you so much, my friend.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
If you're just tuning in, this is The Roger Stone Show. We're here on WABC Radio. You, of course, can find us at 770 on your AM dial, WABC, making AM radio great again. You can, if you're from out of town, you can hear us on WABCradio.com. You can either listen in real time or you can download the show later and listen to it then. Myself, I recommend that you get the WABC radio app and download that to your phone. That way you won't miss a minute of the extraordinary programming that we have here at WABC. I'm talking about Rudy Giuliani, Judge Jeanine Pirro, the quarterback of the turbocharging of the American economy under Donald Trump, Larry Kudlow, Andrew Giuliani, a great friend of mine, so many other, Frank Morano, the great Sid Rosenberg. You don't want to miss any of this. So you really ought to download the ABC 77 radio app to your phone so you don't miss a second of the dynamic programming we have here at WABC Radio. Joining me now is a gentleman. You've heard the story of General Michael Flynn. You know what they tried to do to him. Many of you know my story where I was framed for Russian collusion that never actually existed, charged with the process crime of lying in my voluntary testimony before the House Intelligence Committee when, in fact, no misstatement I made hid any underlying crime or concealed any Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or by Robert Mueller's own admission in his long-redacted secret final report, any crime whatsoever on my part. In my case, I was pressured simply to try to force me to testify falsely against President Donald Trump, something I refused to do. Buffalo Congressman Chris Collins, a good friend of mine, one of the earliest, if not the earliest, supporters of Donald Trump in the House of Representatives, a key figure in President Donald Trump's drive for the nomination and his improbable election to the presidency in 2016, would later to be framed for a non-existent financial crime, despite the fact that the Chris Collins I know never made or took an illicit, illegal penny in his entire life. Chris Collins, now a native of my home state of Florida, a resident, I should say, of my home state of Florida, formerly from frozen Western New York, joins us on the Roger Stone Show now. Chris Collins, welcome to the show.
Oh, Roger, it's always good to be with you, and I appreciate your introduction. And there is a lot of similarities between what happened to you and General Flynn and myself. We always say when the deep state comes after you with all their resources and with impunity to devastate families, destroy careers, and they leave carnage in their wake, and they actually laugh about it. The prosecutor in my case wrote a book, and he actually said they sat in his office and watched me after I was indicted stand in front of people in Buffalo to say that I'm innocent and I'm going to fight this. And lo and behold, I actually did get reelected with 11 felony counts on my head. He indicted me less than 90 days from the election, and in his book, he said he knew that would have an impact on my election, thinking I would not be reelected. It was a bad day for them when a sitting member of Congress with 11 federal indictments hanging over him is actually reelected. And now, after, they destroyed my career, I had to resign. We had them all caught. They had violated my constitutional rights. They called the speech or debate right of a member of Congress. Nancy Pelosi actually had her people write an amicus brief supporting the issues that I had raised when they went through computer records of my staff and other things in direct violation of the Constitution. And when we told the judge that certain things that they were using to get an indictment were illegally obtained, he ruled against us on that motion. And we then said, well, fine, we're going to appeal this to the Supreme Court, which a member of Congress has the right to do. And so it was going to delay my trial 2 or 3 years. And in his book, Jeff Berman actually said we strategized on what we could do, so we decided to split the case and try the congressman's son in 4 months. And we were pretty confident he was not going to sit on the sidelines and watch his son be tried. 24-year-old that the judge later said never before has a 24-year-old been criminally charged for selling a single stock when the stock market was closed in Australia, but NASDAQ didn't honor it. But the judge said it's never happened. It's always been a civil settlement. And in the book, he admitted they pressured me using my son, and he said we didn't expect the congressman would sit on the sidelines waiting while his son was tried. And they got me, like any loving father would do. I wasn't going to let that happen. And so I gave them what they wanted. I pled guilty. I resigned. And it did assist. My son was able to plead to a single charge. He was given probation. They threw me in prison. Heck, I was in prison for 10 weeks. The judge sentenced me to 26 months. And I never sold stock. And the stock market was closed.
Yeah, just to be very clear, Chris Collins, who was a distinguished former Erie County executive, an overwhelmingly Democratic county where he won election as a Republican, a distinguished member of Congress, was framed for and charged with and ultimately pled to insider trading when, in fact, he never sold any stock and never made a penny because, like in the case of General Michael Flynn, they leveraged an action by his son, which was an accident, against him. Kind of walk us through that, because you did a great job explaining this on my show, The Stone Zone, about a week ago. And it occurred to me, General Flynn's had more than ample opportunity to lay out for the people how he was abused by those who were really trying to get to Donald Trump. I now feel like I've had a pretty good opportunity, although I look forward to future opportunities to lay out the outrageousness of the charges against me. When I go through the airport a few hours from now, somebody will snarl at me that I'm a traitor. No, there's no evidence whatsoever to support that claim. But, Chris, explain to people exactly what went down here in terms of your stock holdings.
Well, in this case, it was a drug to treat secondary progressive MS. I was the largest shareholder. I've been shepherding this to treat the most debilitating disease known with no treatment options. It primarily hits women 70% of the time, and it says the secondary progressive MS strikes them down. They go into what they call an MS fog. They don't want to get up in the morning, and tragically, it ends up in suicide. A very high rate because these women don't want to be a burden on their family. And we had a drug that we knew worked. We had compassionate patients on it for several years, but it turns out in the trial, frankly, we had the wrong patients in the trial. It had to do with the trial design. The drug does work, but it did not show meaningful results compared to a placebo because we frankly had patients in the trial that were too early stage versus late stage with secondary progressive MS. But putting that aside, the drug results came in, and I got a phone call, or actually it was an email, and it was devastating to me, emotionally. And I called two people, 5-minute phone calls. I called my wife and I called my son to share the bad news. Now, I also knew there was a trading halt, so the stock couldn't be traded. And unfortunately, in the case of it was listed in Australia, Friday morning. So when I went to bed Thursday night, yes, my son knew the trial results, so did my wife, and I did, obviously. None of us could trade the stock. We got up Friday morning, and my son gave me a call at 9:45 and said, Dad, at 9:30 in the morning, NASDAQ's trading the stock. They didn't honor the trading halt, so I sold stock. And all of a sudden, he was 24 years old. Everyone else was selling stock. And so he did what he did, and you can't undo it. I never sold any stock. I never called another person. They actually raided a lot of homes and threatened people who also sold stock, saying you must have been tipped off by Collins. And I did not. They tried like you can't believe to find a text or a phone call or something that linked me to one of, hundreds of people were selling the stock. They could not find anything other than 2 5-minute phone calls, one to my wife, one to my son. And the chairman of the board, even though the judge was really chastising me for making those phone calls, the chairman of the board wrote a letter to the judge and said, all of us shared this information with our family because there was no harm in doing so. It was a trading halt. And then the chairman of the board said, shame on us at Innate Immunotherapeutics. We didn't take the steps we needed to make sure the stock didn't trade on NASDAQ on the pink sheet. And it did. And my son did sell that one stock. So they had me. They saw, an opportunity. They tried to link me to other people. Never happened because I didn't call or tell anyone. But they had the leverage they needed. And it did work. We had them all caught up. But when they come in and they say, we're going to try your son without you there, and in this case, he did have the results because I unfortunately called him the night before, and NASDAQ did open for trading the next morning, and he did sell some of his stock, not much, and that was all they needed to go after him, which the federal judge said, I've never seen this. To go after a 24-year-old who frankly didn't know better, and the reason was it was the link to me to take me down. And it worked, just like it did with General Flynn. When they rope your family in, you're going to do whatever you have to do to protect your family. And I did. I paid a steep price, but as you know, Roger, I've now announced I'm going to run for Congress again in Florida 19 when Byron Donalds, who superstar with conservative values and supporter of Trump, decides to run either for governor or U.S. Senate, which is a strong rumor. I'm putting a team together to run for Congress again in Florida 19 and be elected and go back to Congress, which will be the ultimate insult, if you will, to the judge and the prosecutor. For me, they tried to get me out in 18 by indicting me with less than 90 days to go to the election, when they could have waited until after the election with no harm. The prosecutor even said inappropriately, Congressman's constituents need to know that this investigation has resulted in charges coming out of New York City, where we know they could indict a ham sandwich. But you know what? The greatest comeback I'm going to have is being reelected to Congress. And it'll be the first time in over 50 years a member has represented two different states, in my case, New York and Florida. I've got my confidence back. I mean, I'll admit, for 4 years I was in the abyss. But with the help of my friends like you and others and my family, I've climbed out of the abyss. And I'm actually having fun again. People are lining up to get the pictures taken with me, and I feel like the sky is blue and the sun is out.
So people understand why you were targeted, because I think it was a very good summation of the outrageousness of the politicized charge against you. Tell people about your role in Donald Trump's rise to the presidency.
Well, Roger, I was the first sitting member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump for president on February 24th of 2016. And all of a sudden, I became a surrogate for Donald Trump throughout 2016. I was on several hundred Fox, CNN, and MSNBC shows. I was on with Chris Cuomo on CNN 2-3 times a week, and a lot of times even with Chuck Todd on MSNBC, and a lot with Stuart Varney and others on Fox and Fox Business. Always, anytime they came after the president, whether it was on a tweet or a comment, I was the person on the next day defending the president. And when Access Hollywood hit in October, the October surprise, I was the only member willing to go on. I went on CNN the next morning after the Access Hollywood tapes to defend Donald Trump for the comments, and basically said this is locker room talk. That's what guys do. And subsequently, the president did tell me when he actually called me the morning after the election when Hillary conceded. He and Ivanka called me that morning to say he remembered watching me on that show, and he appreciated and always will what I did in defending him when Paul Ryan and others stuck a knife in his back and said he can't get elected, so we're going to pile on. Well, he did get elected. And subsequently, he named me the congressional liaison to the White House, put me on the executive committee of his transition team. I was responsible for going through trying to fill 4,000 positions in the administration from members of Congress and their constituents, and subsequently continued to go on all the talk shows throughout 2017 and 18 until I was indicted. So for 3 years, I'd like to think I was one of the strongest supporters of President Trump, and spent time in the White House and in the Oval Office and on Air Force One, and then ended up in a prison camp for 10 weeks. But he did pardon me. He frankly saved my life, because the judge and the prosecutor would not give me another delay because of COVID. And COVID was ravaging the country in 2020. They forced me in on October 12th when we had asked for a delay until December 8th, because there were no vaccines, there was no treatments for COVID. I was 70 years old with asthma and high blood pressure. They basically played Russian roulette with my life. Even the Buffalo News, which was never a supporter of mine, wrote an editorial saying, "What are you doing sending this man into a prison camp when COVID is ravaging the country? What he did was not a capital offense." But they sent me in. And when Donald Trump got me home for Christmas, pardoning me and you and General Flynn and Paul Manafort and George Papadopoulos the same day, December 22nd, 3 weeks later, COVID ravaged the Pensacola prison camp. 100% of the inmates contracted COVID-19. If I was there, I might well have died from COVID-19. So as I am writing a book, and in the book I'm saying, President Trump saved my life. And the judge and the prosecutor were more than willing to watch me die in a prison camp just so they could make sure I did jail time. Shame on them.
Well, Chris, I know you are not the kind of guy who wears his faith on his sleeve, but you told me that it was your abiding belief in Jesus Christ and the bravery of Donald Trump that saved your life. I've had that same experience. In case they wanted to send me to a dank Georgia prison camp where the Federal Bureau of Prisons insisted there were no COVID cases whatsoever, except for the African-American woman who was the head of the police, the prison guards union at this facility, read about that in the newspaper and found her way to contact one of my attorneys to tell him that there were over 200 cases that they were keeping on the down low and that they were expecting more cases based on some recent testings of inmates. Within weeks of the day I should have reported there, but for my commutation of my sentence, the entire camp was infected. And I, at 70 years old, 68 then, and with a lifetime history of asthma, probably would not have made it either. I think many, many Americans remember the 6 o'clock in the morning over-the-top raid on my home in which 29 heavily armed FBI agents brandishing fully automatic M4 assault weapons surrounded and then stormed my home in a made-for-CNN television moment to arrest me for the entirely fabricated crime of lying to Congress under oath about Russian collusion that never actually existed. You mentioned on my show that they intended to do the exact same thing to you, but that you got a tip that allowed you to avoid this humiliation. What happened?
Well, Roger, you're right. My attorney, because for several months, many months, my attorneys were saying, where are we going with this? The congressman never sold stock. There's a trading halt on the stock. NASDAQ never should have opened. If you want a civil settlement with his son, fine. Why are we doing this in a criminal fashion? And they finally said, Chris, you're going to be indicted. So is your son. And so they said, give us the date. We'll self-surrender. And the prosecutor, Jeffrey Berman, kept saying, we'll hold that under advisement. We'll get back to you, which did not sound good. And it was, I forget, on a Thursday, I got a phone call from an unknown individual that was involved with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Buffalo saying, Congressman, I'm here to tell you they are intending to be at your house at 6 a.m. in the morning with TV cameras to drag you out of bed and make a spectacle of you being arrested. And he said, I know you from when you were county executive for 4 years. You did a great job turning around Erie County. It was bankrupt at the time. And I've watched you in Congress. I believe you're doing what's best for our community. And I cannot sit back and watch this circus take place, which is completely inappropriate. So I'm giving you a phone call. So that night, I went, rented a car at Hertz, took the SIM card out of my phone, drove to New York City, paid cash for the car rental, got in a taxi cab, paid cash for that, had them drop me off 3 blocks from my daughter's apartment in New York City in Manhattan, which she had just moved into a week earlier, so they wouldn't have even known she was there. And they couldn't find me. For 4 days, they couldn't find me. And finally, Jeff Berman's staff called my attorney and said, why don't we have the congressman self-surrender tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. We'll have someone pick him up at your law office. So luckily in my case, there were people there that knew me professionally and did give me that phone call, but they tried to Roger Stone me. And how inappropriate is that they would do this to anyone just for the show of it? I mean, they do these things with impunity and then write books about them. So shame on them all.
All right. Chris Collins, who served his country with distinction in the U.S. Congress from a Western New York district, now very honest with the people of southwestern Florida, that if his superstar congressman, Byron Donalds, vacates the seat he's currently in to either run for governor of Florida or for the U.S. Senate, that Chris Collins is going to enter the lists as a candidate for Congress. Some may say, he's been convicted of a crime. That's why we had him on this show, folks. You can learn the evil and the corruption of our current U.S. Department of Justice. Chris Collins did nothing wrong. Could be a T-shirt, Chris. You might want to look into that. But I want to thank you very much for joining us here. Folks, here is the bottom line of this. What happened to Congressman Collins, what happened to me, these things can happen to you as long as we have a highly politicized, two-tiered justice system in which every American is not treated fairly and where the rule of law is actually not respected. Chris Collins, thank you for joining us so much here on WABC Radio.
It was good, Roger. Thank you for inviting me, and let's all work together to make America great again and elect Donald Trump president in 2024. Have a great day.
All right. That was Congressman Chris Collins, now of Florida, a future candidate for Congress, with a harrowing tale of his outrageous prosecution at the hands of a politically motivated prosecutor. This has been The Roger Stone Show. Again, I want to urge you to download the WABC radio app to your cell phone. This is where you can hear our all-star lineup. You don't want to miss a minute of the great programming that we have here at WABC. You don't want to miss the Cats Roundtable every day at 5, every weekday at 5, 8 o'clock on Sunday mornings. This is where the news gets capsulized and regurgitated back to you with expert analysis. It is a must-listen. Cindy Adams, the queen of gossip, friend of mine for over 50 years. How do you like that? Judge Janine Pirro, Larry Kudlow, Frank Morano, the great Sid Rosenberg. It's an all-star lineup, folks. So you want to download that WABC radio app to your cell phone so you don't miss a minute of it. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm Roger Stone. This has been The Roger Stone Show. And just remember, folks, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Ta-ta.